stakeholders. So the main message from our office is that even though some of the things that I'll describe may be or may appear at first blush in tension with prescribers and the medical community, I really hope that that's viewed as just a very small part of this, because I will touch on law enforcement initiatives that relate not just to heroin trafficking, for instance, which I would guess nobody has a particular concern about and thinks that's a good idea, but also with the occasional case where the facts lead us to it of unlawful prescribing by a doctor. I suspect the medical community might hear about that and have an immediate reaction, but that is a very small sliver of what the office is doing, and is driven by, at least in my opinion, the occasional outrageous facts, not that don't apply to the medical community at large or the vast majority of doctors, but a very small number of complete outliers when it comes to unsafe prescribing habits. So while there is some law enforcement initiatives where there's a little bit of an interaction with the medical community, by and large, we're hoping to highlight, and I think the government in Massachusetts is also hoping to highlight, that there's a large part of this problem where the medical community, I think, both desires to be a significant part of the solution, and our goal is just to explain, here's why it's on our radar screen, here's why we think it should be on the medical community's radar screen, and it's a situation in Massachusetts right now where everybody should view it as a top priority, and there's plenty of work to go around. So I mentioned statistics but didn't really run through them. You'll hear a lot about them today, but from our office's perspective, some of them, when you think about locality, I live in the town of Arlington, there's cities and towns that have a similar population, and you hear 209 heroin overdoses in just the city of Taunton in 2014. In the county of in Middlesex County, we are, as of April 6th, up to the same number of heroin overdose deaths as we were for all of 2012, so a couple years ago. And recent statistics that's got a lot of publicity concerns that now opiates are taking more lives in Massachusetts than either guns or car accidents. All of these things combine to say, we should all really be focused on this. So very quickly, I want to just mention what it means to say that Maura Healey's top-line initiative at the outset of her administration is to address the opiate crisis and try to mitigate some of these horrible statistics that we see. And I won't be able to cover any of them at great length, but my goal is to show that one of the good things about being in the Attorney General's office is we do an awful lot of different things. And if you ask each division or each aspect of the office to dedicate itself to a particular problem, hopefully over time, and this certainly isn't going to happen overnight, we as an office will make a big difference. And then when the Baker administration is undertaking the same process, there's obviously lots of parts of the administration that also have a role to play, and it's truly an all-hands-on-deck mentality. So in our office, I'll just touch on criminal enforcement, civil enforcement, some of the policy initiatives, including the PMP that we've already heard about, as well as some of the broader societal issues that we'll do what we can, but quite frankly need a lot of help. So on criminal enforcement, our renewed focus will include everything from heroin trafficking, which has not always been a focus of the AG's office, primarily because it tends to be local and driven by the district attorneys, but we're simply going to be working to collaborate and offer additional resources for that type of drug trafficking case. There's also prescription drug trafficking, something that deserves a little more coordination and resources statewide that we'll be doing. And as I mentioned briefly, on occasion, our Medicaid fraud division will be pursuing what we think of as unlawful prescribing cases, but that's a relatively small part of the puzzle. Then there's the civil enforcement side. That's where my background and experience lies. And generally speaking, everything that I'm about to describe fits this general theme that we're pursuing. And the theme under a civil enforcement perspective is that the risks of abuse and diversion with respect to opiate painkillers are well known. They're well established that there's a diversion problem in the gray market, and that many people start on unprescribed to them opiate painkillers. In light of that risk, are the commercial actors involved taking the proper commercially reasonable steps to guard against that known risk of abuse and diversion. So that general approach will be applied to both pharmaceutical marketers, manufacturers and marketers, as well as the dispensing side of the equation. I think those are two different areas, but where we'll be applying that mindset. In light of the known risks, are these commercial actors taking reasonable steps to guard against the known risks? But the civil enforcement side has lots of other aspects to it, and just to touch on a few, naloxone pricing has been a very hot topic. On the one hand, we have a free market, and when demand goes up, prices go up. There may not be much to be done on that, but we're certainly going to be viewing it through a lens of a public health crisis and whether there's any creative law enforcement approaches, civil law enforcement approaches that might come into play. And then also on the insurance coverage side, we have a part of our office that is very, it covers healthcare, our healthcare division, but is consumer oriented. And we'll be applying the basic premise that we've been trying to apply to behavioral health generally to addiction treatment. And that approach, that premise is that we have long in Massachusetts talked about behavioral health parity, and we're trying to breathe life into that concept from an enforcement perspective by actually looking at whether administrative processes and other potential hurdles undermine the facial parity, because there's almost always facial parity among health plans or for health plans vis-a-vis consumers. And the question is that really what consumers experience when they either need behavioral health services or likewise addiction treatment services, which I think are just a subset of the larger picture. So we're going to be looking very closely at those insurance coverage issues. When I say from an enforcement perspective, that doesn't mean necessarily there'll be lots of lawsuits. Almost everything we do in our office, lawsuits are preceded by an opportunity to improve the situation, to do the right thing. I fully expect that if we identify barriers and hurdles to treatment, behavioral health or addiction treatment, that once we identify them and contend that they're actionable, that's likely to result in settlements. But I say that not based on recent experience in that particular area, but that's generally speaking the way the office has tackled similar systemic problems in the past. So insurance coverage, just another example of civil enforcement. We'll be very brief on the rest so we can, in due course, get to the panel discussion where I hope we can discuss all this a little more. On the policy front, there are dozens and dozens of bills filed at the beginning of the legislative session that in one way or another seek to assist in combating the opioid crisis, and we and lots of other elected officials will be reviewing those, seeing which ones are the best. A lot of it will come down to funding, and that will always be difficult, especially in the current economic times, but we'll be doing a lot of hard work on that. But one policy issue I wanted to focus on is the prescription monitoring program. Generally speaking, whether you view it from a law enforcement perspective or just a policy perspective, if you want to cut down on diversion of opiates, it's a wonderful tool. Here in Massachusetts, the goal from our office's perspective is just to make it as useful and used as possible, as close in time reporting as possible, and also to then educate the medical community and everybody else to please use it. I hear a chorus of agreement on that front from lots of different perspectives, including the medical community, and that's something that we want to seize on to both make it work a little better and then also encourage everyone to use it, because it's a pretty remarkable tool. So I will ever so quickly move on to the ones where the intersection between our office and the MMS or the medical community at large is most clear. And as I mentioned, we think there's plenty of work to go around, but there's one that plainly we, certainly in the AG's office, but probably even the government writ large, is not qualified to do. And that is to make sure that the prescribing practices across the board take into account this well-known risk of abuse and diversion of opiates. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that whatever the best standards are that I expect many, many doctors in the Commonwealth currently practice, the idea is to bring as many others or all others up to that same standard. I think you'll hear a lot about that from others with more expertise today, but our office sees that as a real important part of the crisis, an obvious response, but something that plainly, at least plainly in my opinion, isn't the government's job to do, where we really need thought leaders in the medical community to step up and say, this crisis is affecting a huge segment of our population, and whatever we can do to help. This seems to be at least one, that the idea of raising the bar on, I shouldn't say raising the bar, I think the bar is quite high. It's then making sure that more and more doctors in more and more different specialties follow the best practices. And a couple other things where that interaction is most obvious, I think, I already mentioned making the PMP better and then encouraging everyone to use it. But we are acutely aware that there is also the need to first provide addiction treatment and then have it covered. And as I mentioned, with respect to the insurance companies, that will be something that we view as something where we can help.